June 18, 1940. 3:47 a.m. Bodsey Manor, Suffolk, the birthplace of British radar. The wind clawed at the canvas walls of the Coastal Operations Hut. Inside, beneath the red glow of blackout lamps, a 22-year-old radar operator named Eileen Younghusband leaned toward her cathode-ray screen, a flickering oval of green light surrounded by the soft hum of vacuum tubes. For hours, the screen had been quiet. Just the rhythmic sweep of the signal arm tracing its circular path, heartbeat of a nation waiting for an attack that never came. But tonight something changed. A blip. Barely there. A faint whisper of light just off the English coast. It could have been static. A bird. Atmospheric noise. But something in Eileen's gut told her otherwise. She squinted, adjusting the gain knob, her fingers trembling slightly. The trace appeared again, same place, same size, moving steadily west. "Control, this is Chain Home Station Bodsey," she called into the Bakelite headset. "Unidentified contact bearing 150. Multiple returns, altitude unknown." The voice on the other end paused. "Repeat that, Bodsey." She repeated it, louder this time. The room fell silent. Outside, the surf crashed against the seawall, and the distant boom of anti-aircraft practice echoed like thunder. Within seconds, a phone rang. Then another. Operators at Fighter Command HQ in Bentley Priory jolted awake. Coffee cups rattled. Maps unrolled. The night air filled with the low murmur of plodding officers shouting bearings and vectors. This wasn't just another radar anomaly. The faint blip was multiplying, spreading across the screen like a shadow taking shape. Dozens. Then hundreds. Eileen's voice cracked over the line. "Sir, we have a large formation inbound. Possibly the Luftwaffe's main strike." Miles away, airfield sirens began to wail. Pilots of No. 11 Group RAF, still half-dressed, boots unlaced, sprinted toward their Spitfires. Engines roared to life under the sea. Within seconds, a phone rang. Then another. Operators at Fighter Command HQ in Bentley Priory jolted awake. Coffee cups rattled. Maps unrolled. The night air filled with the low murmur of plodding officers shouting bearings and vectors. This wasn't just another radar anomaly. The faint blip was multiplying, spreading across the screen like a shadow taking shape. Dozens. Then hundreds. Eileen's voice cracked over the line. "Sir, we have a large formation inbound. Possibly the Luftwaffe's main strike." Miles away, airfield sirens began to wail. Pilots of No. 11 Group RAF, still half-dressed, boots unlaced, sprinted toward their Spitfires. Engines roared to life under the cold dawn sky. What began as a flicker on a glass screen was about to ignite the battle for Britain's survival. And Eileen, the young woman behind the console, had just triggered the warning that would save a nation. But she didn't know that yet. The faint echo grew stronger. And behind it, something far larger was coming. June 18, 1940. 4:12 a.m. RAF Uxbridge, Fighter Command Operations Room. The plotting table glowed under the pale light of a glass ceiling. Women from the WAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, moved like clockwork, sliding colored markers across the vast map of southern England. Each tiny triangle of metal represented enemy aircraft, every movement dictated by the faint green signals pulsing from the coast. "Raid detected, bearing 150, altitude 15,000 and climbing," a controller called out. At the center of the chaos stood Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of No. 11 Group RAF. He gripped his pipe, eyes fixed on the map, watching the red markers multiply across the channel like an advancing tide. "Get me Biggin Hill. Scramble squadrons immediately." His voice was calm, clipped, but beneath the uniformed discipline lay a man fully aware of what was coming. On the wall, the doubting system, Britain's secret defensive network, whirred to life. Radar stations, observer posts, and interceptor fields all humming together, connected by the thinnest strands of wire and hope. It was the first integrated air defense system in history, and this was its greatest test. Meanwhile, at Biggin Hill, The Spitfires of No. 32 Squadron were already taxiing down the wet runway. Engines coughed to life, exhaust smoke curling into the dawn mist. Ground crews pounded on fuselages, shouting above the roar. "Good luck, lads!" Pilot Officer Jeffrey Wellham, barely 19, tightened his oxygen mask and glanced at the horizon. He'd flown missions before, but something about this felt different, heavier. "Angels 15, intercept course north by east," crackled the radio. He pushed the throttle. The Spitfire leapt forward, wheels lifting from the runway just as the first rays of sunlight broke over Kent. Back at Bawdsey, Eileen watched her scope bloom with hostile signatures. They filled the screen like locusts. She whispered, "God help them." In Berlin, Hermann Göring had promised Hitler that the Luftwaffe would bring Britain to its knees in a matter of weeks. Operation Sea Lion, was ready. But first, the skies had to be cleared of the RAF. This raid was meant to be the hammer blow, the one that would finally shatter Britain's defense network. Except one small problem had just changed everything. That faint radar blip, the one that shouldn't have been noticed, had robbed the Luftwaffe of surprise. By the time the German bombers reached the Channel coast, Spitfires and Hurricanes were already climbing to meet them. From his cockpit, Jeffrey caught sight of them first, black dots glinting in the rising sun. Junkers 88s in tight formation, flanked by Messerschmitt 109s. His heart thudded. Sweat pooled under his gloves. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high!" The radio erupted with chatter. He could almost feel the vibration of his Merlin engine like a pulse through his spine. As the two forces closed in, the channel below seemed to vanish, replaced by a sky about to erupt. The calm of early morning gave way to chaos. Tracer fire. Contrails. Explosions. Dozens of aircraft swirling in a lethal ballet over the southern coast. And far below, in radar huts and command centers, women like Eileen tracked the dance in silence, the green dots shifting, colliding, disappearing. Each vanishing blip wasn't just a plane lost. It was a life erased. Still, the RAF was holding. Barely. But then came a sound no one expected, a second wave. Larger. Faster. Headed straight for London. June 18, 1940. 5:02 a.m. Over the English Channel. From 30,000 feet, the world was a storm of smoke and sunlight. To the Luftwaffe pilots, the sea below looked like a sheet of beaten silver, but the radio chatter told a different story. "Achtung! Spitfire! Zwölfer Hawk!" Tracer fire cut the air like sewing needles of light. A Junkers 88 banked hard left, trailing smoke, one engine aflame. The pilot's voice was a scream lost in static. Above them, Oberleutnant Franz Keller, leading the second wave, could see the contrails of the first formation breaking apart over the Kent coast. That wasn't supposed to happen. The English were supposed to be asleep. Unprepared. But they were already waiting. "How?" Keller muttered into his oxygen mask. Then his formation hit the coast, and the flak began. Anti-aircraft batteries from Dover to Dungeness lit the sky with thunder. Black puffs bloomed all around the German bombers like dark flowers. The steady rhythm of the engines turned to chaos, screaming alarms, shrapnel tearing through metal, the stench of oil and cordite filling the cabins. Still, the mission pressed on. Their orders: strike radar station Ventnor on the Isle of Wight and cripple Britain's early warning grid. If they succeeded, the next wave of bombers could reach London unchallenged. Meanwhile, 80 miles inland, Bentley Priory, headquarters of Fighter Command. The plotting room was almost shaking with tension. Every few seconds, a new call came through the switchboard. "Raid approaching Maidstone. Squadrons 74 and 92 engaging. Losses unknown." Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, nicknamed Stuffy, for his quiet reserve, stood motionless before the map. He wasn't watching the red markers, he was listening. Every sound, every report told him something numbers couldn't. Britain was being tested to the breaking point. And yet, the system was holding. Barely. Dowding turned to his adjutant. "If we lose Ventnor, the south coast goes blind." Sir, Biggin Hill can't cover it alone. Dowding's voice was low, deliberate. Then we send in 609 Squadron. Tell them this is it. RAF Middle Wallop Airfield, Hampshire. The tarmac was alive with motion. Ground crews fueled Hurricanes while the pilots buckled in, sweat dripping down their faces despite the dawn chill. Among them, Flight Lieutenant John Dundas climbed into his Hurricane, the canvas skin still patched from the previous week's dogfight. Target? He asked over the engine noise. Ventnor. You're all that's standing between them and the radar chain. He smiled grimly. No pressure, then. Engines roared to life, propellers biting the air. The Hurricanes launched into the haze, climbing through the clouds toward the black specks moving fast over the channel. At Bodsey, Eileen could barely sit still. Her headphones crackled with overlapping transmissions, voices shouting, static, the clipped tones of controllers moving squadrons like chess pieces across a burning board. She glanced at her screen again. The second wave was splitting, half heading west, half north toward London. She grabbed the field phone. Sir, we've got a diversion. They're trying to draw the fighters off. But the line went dead. Then, for the first time that morning, her radar screen went blank. Silence. No blips. No hum. Just the low electrical buzz of an empty circuit. Power loss? She whispered. The operator beside her shook his head. No interference. Someone's jamming us. A German bomber formation had begun transmitting false echoes, the Luftwaffe's first attempt at radar countermeasures. Britain's invisible shield was faltering, just as the sky above filled with fire. And in that moment, everything hung on whether one damaged radar station, Ventnor, could survive the storm. June 18, 1940. 5:37 a.m. Isle of Wight, Ventnor Radar Station. The radar towers loomed above the cliffs, stark against the morning haze. 240 feet of steel and wire, humming with the fragile heartbeat of Britain's defense. Below them, deep in the operations bunker, the air smelled of metal, sweat, and ozone. Sergeant Tom Jeffries, the duty technician, wiped grime from his forehead and listened to the tremor of the diesel generator. Every screen in the bunker flickered with green light, tracing arcs of the invisible sky. Then the siren wailed. Raid incoming, 20-plus bombers! Jeffries didn't look up. He'd been through drills before. But this time, the ground was already shaking. A voice crackled over the intercom. All personnel to shelter stations. Enemy formation heading straight for us. Outside, the Luftwaffe descended. Junkers 88s broke through the clouds in formation, bomb bay doors yawning open. Tracer rounds from British Bofors guns laced the air, exploding in bright orange bursts. The gunners fired until the barrels glowed, but the bombers kept coming. The first wave hit the cliffside, a column of smoke rising like a black fist. The blast flung men to the floor. Consoles sparked. Dust rained from the ceiling. Jeffries crawled to the control panel, slamming a hand on the emergency switch. The main transmitter went offline, but the backup generator was still humming. The radar stayed alive. Barely. He shouted to his operator. Keep it running! Even if the roof comes down, we hold this signal. Through the static, the faint pulse of enemy aircraft still flickered. It was weak, distorted, but enough. Enough to warn the network that the bombers were heading west, not north. At Bentley Priory, the duty officer looked up from his headset. Ventnor's still transmitting, sir! Dowding leaned forward. Then they've bought us time. He turned to his staff. Signal all stations, shift interception vectors. Get every squadron in the air. High above, Flight Lieutenant Dundas's Hurricane broke through the clouds, trailing smoke. He'd already downed one bomber, his plane peppered with holes. The world around him was chaos, flames, falling debris, the smell of burning fuel. Below, the Isle of Wight was a patchwork of fire. He saw the Ventnor radar towers still standing through the smoke, twisted, battered, but upright. They're still transmitting. He said into his radio, his voice raw with disbelief. Copy that, came the reply. You've got friendlies incoming. Hold the line. He banked his hurricane hard and dove toward another Junkers, guns blazing. In that single moment, one man fighting above, one woman tracking below, Britain's air defense network stayed alive by the thinnest thread of human will. At WWII's scope came back to life. The echoes reappeared, faint but clear. She almost cried from relief. "Ventnor's back," she shouted. "We're tracking again." The message relayed up the chain in seconds. The network was whole once more. And because of that signal, that fragile green pulse clawing its way through static and smoke, the RAF's interceptors reached the coast just in time. Over Kent, Spitfires streaked into the sunlight like silver arrows. They tore into the bomber formation that had broken through. Explosions flared, wings shattered, engines died. The Luftwaffe formation began to crumble, discipline giving way to survival. They dropped their payloads early, scattered, turned for home. By the time the second wave reached the French coast again, half their number were gone. And the radar chain, though damaged, bleeding, smoking, was still alive. Inside the Ventnor bunker, Jeffries sat against the wall, his ears ringing, uniform covered in dust. The backup generator sputtered once, then died. He looked at the radar console, still glowing faintly. He smiled. Above, sunlight broke through the clouds, revealing the twisted metal towers. Still standing. The miracle wasn't victory. It was endurance. And the endurance had bought Britain another dawn. But for doubting in his staff, the morning brought a new terror, because the Germans would learn from this. The next attack wouldn't just aim for radar towers. It would aim for London itself. June 18, 1940. 6:21 a.m. Fighter Command, Bentley Priory. The room smelled of sweat, coffee, and burning dust. On the great plotting table, the red markers were shifting, no longer surging toward the coast, but retreating. The worst was over. For now. Dowding stood motionless, pipe unlit, eyes fixed on the map as though he could still hear the distant roar of engines over the channel. A WAF officer approached, trembling slightly from exhaustion. "Sir? Bodsey confirms the tracks are clear. Enemy returning to base." Dowding nodded once. "Signaled the Prime Minister. The invasion is delayed." He didn't smile. He knew this wasn't victory, just survival by inches. But those inches mattered. They had always mattered. Later that morning, Bodsey Manor, Suffolk. Eileen sat outside for the first time in hours, hands trembling around a tin mug of tea gone cold. Her eyes burned from staring at the scope all night, the phantom green circles still imprinted on her vision. Around her, the world looked almost normal again. Birds returned to the hedgerows. The sea glinted under a pale sun. And yet the silence felt unnatural, the kind that only follows chaos. An officer stepped out of the hut, holding a telegram. He handed it to her without a word. "Raid successfully repelled. Radar warning credited with early interception. Commendations to Bodsey personnel pending." She read it twice, the words barely sinking in. That tiny blip. That flicker she almost dismissed as noise, had changed the course of the war. She leaned back, eyes on the horizon where the channel shimmered. For a moment, she imagined the fleets gathering on the French coast, the invasion barges waiting for orders that never came. Because the skies were not theirs. Berlin, Luftwaffe headquarters, Tempelhof. Goring paced before a map littered with red pins. His officers stood silent, afraid to speak. The operation that was meant to cripple the British radar network had failed. The blind island was still seeing everything. "How did they know?" he barked. "How were they ready?" No one answered. They didn't yet understand the invisible advantage that Britain possessed: a line of towers, a network of operators, and one woman who refused to ignore a flicker on a screen. In frustration, Goring slammed his fist onto the table. "They can't stop us forever," he growled. But deep down, everyone in that room knew the truth: the element of surprise was gone. And once lost, it never returns. July 1940. The Battle of Britain begins. The air war that followed would define a generation. Dogfights over the Channel, burning cities, the drone of bombers over London's night sky. But Britain's defense always began the same way, with a green pulse sweeping across a round screen, somewhere on the coast. Every pilot scrambled, every intercept ordered, began with a signal like the one Eileen saw that morning. That single blip was no accident. It was the moment a new kind of warfare was born, one fought not just with bullets and bravery, but with information, patience, and faith in a machine. Decades later, a gray-haired Eileen Younghusband sat before a classroom of RAF recruits. On the desk beside her lay a small radar scope, salvaged from a museum display. She tapped the glass gently and smiled. "It looked just like this," she said. "Except back then, we didn't know what we were doing would make history." The young cadets leaned forward, silent. "When I saw that blip," she continued, "I could have ignored it. Thought it was a glitch. But something told me, no, that's real. And because I believed what I saw, hundreds of pilots got the call in time." She paused, eyes distant. "You'll have moments like that too. Moments when you have to trust what your instruments, and your instincts, tell you." Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows, the same rhythmic pulse she once watched sweep across her radar screen. June 18, 1940 would never appear in headlines. No medals were pinned for spotting a blip. No photograph captured the moment the world changed inside a dimly lit bunker by the sea. But historians would later agree, that morning, Britain's fate tilted. One woman's focus. One machine's whisper. One flicker of light in the darkness. A single radar blip that saved a nation.